That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Both of you, beautiful song choices. It fits perfectly with the theme today. I chose forgiveness as part of a series of talks this month that have to do with big subjects that have been talked about forever and ever and ever, and a lot of the talks that I do touch upon some of these issues. And I thought I would call it reminders, so that we have a little reminder of how to move through the world without cluttering up our minds and our hearts with some of the things that we can easily, if we're more aware, handle in the moment. And so I thought forgiveness would be a good one today, even though that is an amazingly large topic. I mean, it's a huge topic, and it covers a lot of areas. You know, I mean, the forgiveness of me for something I perceive you have done, or forgiving myself, or asking for forgiveness, or just looking at the situation and recognizing that it's not the way you want it to be, and you need to cleanse your heart of what it's feeling like inside, the stress that's being created because you're just not comfortable with what is. So forgiveness is huge, and it also has some components which can be dealt with before the need for forgiveness arises. And I want to talk about that for a few minutes after I just give you these ideas around forgiveness and how important it is. So Tara Brach tells this story about, you guys know Tara Brach? She's a psychologist and she's a meditation guru. She's fabulous. She puts all of her stuff out there on YouTube and in various other ways through podcasts and Facebook live conferences that you can join for free. I mean, she allows you to get all of her stuff for free because she wants you to have it. And she's really, really, really good. TaraBrach, a wealth of information. And she tells this story about two political prisoners who spent time in the same cell, a lot of time in the same cell, years. Eventually they were both released and they went their separate ways, but they happened to meet up at a special place one day, honoring a person that they had both loved very, very much. And they had an opportunity to talk. And one of the political prisoners says to the other one, "Have you forgiven our captors?" He says, "No, I will never forget it. I will never forget the injustice. I will never forgive the pain and hurt that I felt." The other political prisoner looks him directly in the eyes and says, "Ah, so you're still locked up." He's still in jail. He's reliving and reliving and reliving these hurts every single day because he doesn't feel that he can forgive. And maybe has a wrong idea of what forgiveness really is. You know, I mean, forgiveness is for us. Forgiveness definitely is for us. To live with the judgment, the blame that's in our hearts brings a ton of stress. It's truly a stressful way to live, resenting people out there, resenting situations out there, resenting circumstances out there. And is there a way to handle that up front? Yeah, I really believe there is a way to handle that up front. You know, blame is a major component of bringing about judgment and hurt in our lives, which necessitates from time to time this whole idea of forgiveness. Now, the things that I'm telling you are not new. Sometimes I put a little spin on it. But the techniques of forgiveness are wide-ranging. You can go anywhere and learn techniques that psychologists have set forth. You can learn techniques which have been set forth by religious people. You can learn ancient techniques for forgiveness. You can learn even some of the new stuff, which I think is kind of fun, like learning how to forget fast. Can you develop the skill of forgetting? I mean, that's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because then you haven't really taken the time to go through the hurt and to deal with the problem. You just decide that you're going to forget it. And I'm not so sure that's a great way of dealing with forgiveness, but there are just a whole panoply of ways to do so. But if we didn't find ourselves in that place where we were blaming, then we wouldn't even need all of these techniques for forgiveness. Humans are interesting. We are very interesting. We are sensitive. We're sentient beings. We're people who have a heart, and we can be hurt. And sometimes that hurt is difficult to deal with, and we don't know how to do it. That happens to a lot of us. And you probably know people that are not very good at dealing with hurt. And so they hand it right back to other people, you see. They hand it back to them. They hurt others as a result of them being hurt. They don't even know they're doing it. I mean, it's just like, I can't handle this, is the deep feeling. And they lash out at somebody else. And the cycle continues and continues and continues. There's a quote that I really like that is instructive of a story that I'm going to tell you here in a moment. And this quote goes like this. It's by a woman named Sue Atkins. And she says, blame and vengeance is a lazy form of grief. Blame and vengeance is a lazy form of grief. So, some time ago, there was a murder that occurred, and it was gang-related. The person who did the killing was 14 years of age, and the person who was killed was 14 years of age. Youngsters trying to make a name for themselves in gangland fashion. And this killer, the 14-year-old that killed a woman's only child, was a homeless guy, had been left as a street urchin, not many resources, no schooling, and the only comfort he got was through the protection of gangs. So he was asked to do a killing in order to make sure that he could be in this gang. And he did it. He was caught. He was brought before the court. He was charged with murder as a juvenile. And when you're charged with murder as a juvenile and you're not 15 or 16, then you're not going to be charged as an adult in the prison system. You have to be 16 years old in order to find yourself being charged as an adult here in California. And so this woman knew that he, the killer of her son, was going to be released at some time, maybe 21 years of age. They can hold you until you're 25. But she had an opportunity to speak upon the guilty verdict being rendered. And what she did was talk about how wonderful her son was. And then she turned to the young man who had killed her son and said, I'm going to kill you. And she was admonished, and there was a courtroom filled with murmurings. And she was ushered out of the courtroom. Sometime shortly after it, she made arrangements through working with the juvenile prison system to go visit him. And she went into the juvenile prison facility and she explained that she was there to help and that she'd put money on his books. And she tried to have a conversation, which didn't go as well as she had wanted it to go and didn't go like he thought it would go. But there was glass between them and he felt somewhat safe because, after all, she had threatened to kill him. But she kept coming back. She kept coming back and spending time with him. She kept asking how he was doing. She kept her thumb on this issue of him being all right while he was locked up, knowing how difficult it might be. She started to become empathetic to his situation, being a homeless child with issues, and felt that she needed to deal with her own grief in a way that made sense. So when he finally got out, and he was released at age 21, she arranged for him to get a job. She had friends who had job opportunities and would take in somebody like this young man. And he needed a place to stay, and she had a conversation with him, and she said, "Why don't you come stay in my son's old room. I haven't used it forever and ever. He didn't have a place to go. He said, all right. He came into her house and she stared at him and she said, do you remember when I told you that I was going to kill you? He said, how could I ever forget that? She said, I did. I did. That person that you were is no longer the person that I see. That person is gone. That person is not here today. Her grief was fully worked through without the necessity of ongoing blame that would create a situation which could tear her apart. I absolutely love that story. It's a true story that talks about, and even if it wasn't, even if it had no basis in truth, it is incredibly instructive as to how we might move through our own lives with empathy as a guide, with the lack of judgment and blame as our guidepost. So you can't talk about forgiveness without talking about this reading of Luke chapter 6, 37, verse 37, which says, judge not, and you will not be judged. Condemn not, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. You know, this condemning is like blaming. We are looking to condemn and be offended more often than we should. I know that. Because I think it's a natural response that some humans have, that most humans have, all humans have. We look to place blame on other things that we don't like happening in our lives that shift blame away from us, perhaps, or shift blame away from the truth. We find ways to apply blame when you wouldn't even think that it should be part of the conversation. I mean, I have been so heartbroken around Hawaii and Lahaina and the magnificent cultural, iconic structures of their life there being destroyed, not to mention a death toll which is going up and up and up and up. And instead of support for this, there are legions of people out there that are blaming this incident or this situation or that situation, rather than being the ones that step into the realm and try to do whatever they can to help. They're interested in pointing the finger. I mean, who's to blame for this? Who is to blame for this? And of course, all sorts of blame fingers are pointed, from climate change to an inability to, remove grasses, non-native grasses from the areas so that they don't die and become more fire prone, to a lack of people taking care of their structures because they're all wooden. I mean, people blaming rather than stepping in and doing something that might be effective in helping to solve the issues that are confronted by people who live there. And by the way, they are many. Those issues are going to be many. I mean, if you think that you can just rebuild an entire city that is outside of the scope of travel from other locations, you might think again, because there's no place to house people who might do the building. There are no structures to issue permits, no building inspectors, no government infrastructure, for there are no government buildings anymore. I mean, people are going to move out, and then what is going to happen? Are they going to be able to rebuild? How? Who's going to help? I mean, there are so many things we have to get right. So many things that have to be done in order to plan how this can happen. And I'm not saying it can't. I believe that it can. I believe when we all come together and we unify in a way that puts blame aside And stop saying you are the ones that caused this, rather than step into it and say, let's figure out how to do this. Let's make this paradise once again. Let's do it in a magnificent way together. So, it's a natural thing. I mean, you hurt and you blame. You say, I can't believe that happened. It's their fault. It's their fault. It's their fault. Something outside of you. When in truth, what it is all inside of us. It's all inside of us. It's our choice as to how we respond to anything. I mean, do we wish to see it in this way, frame it this way, or do we wish to see it in a completely opposite way and frame it this way? Is our choice. Reframing is a great way to create a situation where there is an empathetic response. In fact, empathy itself has a reframing component. So I think that when the victim of that murder's mother decided to step in and be a helper, rather than spend her life in resentment jail, in prison, if you will, that she made a magnificent decision which created a platform for growth, which created a way that people could look at this situation and say, there are situations in my life where they may not be as bad, but I can step into them and I can see them differently. I can see that a person who lashes out at me, that I might be angry at, that I might blame for making me feel bad, for hurting me in some way, that person who lashes out may even be having a tough time. That I can be empathetic and I can see beyond the veil that I've created and recognize that life is in session for these people. The way people treat me is a reflection of how they're feeling inside. I know that. I absolutely know that. But I can still be offended now and then. But when I'm offended, I have to bring it back to that moment where I say, but the way people treat me is a reflection of how they're feeling about themselves. So when that middle finger comes up at me on the freeway, and I don't know them. I mean, they don't know me, right? They don't know me. They've never met me. They have no idea. I mean, how could this possibly be about me? It's what's inside of them. It's coming out in the finger form. It's true. I mean, I can look at this situation when that happens today and go, well, bless you on your way. I hope your day is far better. Life is so interesting, isn't it? It truly is an interesting ride. And I just love it. I just love life. Empathy is a great way to get over this idea of blame and to move yourself into a space where you don't need all of these scientific forgiveness techniques. But maybe you do. Maybe you do. Maybe there's still some stuff in there that has gone beyond what it should have gone beyond, that you haven't dealt with, that you need to forgive in the moment. And maybe it's about you. Maybe you haven't forgiven yourself. Maybe you haven't. Maybe it's about somebody else that's been in your life forever and ever and ever. Maybe they have bothered you for years, Mom and Dad. And they're not even here anymore. I mean, it's time to do something about that, isn't it? It's time to do something about it. It's time to chalk it up as an experience. It's time to change the way I look at it. It is time to reflect on the growth that came about through having to deal with the situations I had to deal with. It's time for you to reflect on the growth that you have been given, offered, in dealing with those difficult situations that you have endured. Maybe as a result of yourself. Give yourself a break. I have heard forgiveness gurus begin with this. Stop the war. Stop the war. That's all you have to do. Beginning, stop the war. That shows the willingness to be able to do something. Now let's begin the healing process. In order for the healing process to begin, you must stop the war. And this is the tagline that I used on my talk today around forgiveness. The tagline I use is, when anyone or anything remains unforgiven, it has power over us emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and even physically. Stop the war. You know, there is a minister that I know, and I like him a lot, and he's got this name that, I mean, you got to be a minister if you're named this. His name's Mark Anthony Lord. You've heard of? She's nodding her head. Yes, Mark Anthony Lord, and Mark Anthony Lord talks about forgiveness. It's his big thing. He recognizes as unity ministers. He's a unity minister. He's got a church in San Diego. And Mark Anthony Lord believes this. He believes that if there is any inkling of resentment left in your heart when you decide to forgive a person or a situation, then that forgiveness doesn't happen. You can't hold unforgiveness for something or somebody and pretend to forgive something or somebody else. It can't be done. You are, in a sense, tainted in there, you see. You're capable of doing it, so you'll do it rather than let it go. And I understand that. I get that. That's a simple way of looking at it, isn't it? So if you make the decision, if you become willing to forgive, to, in a sense, to let this go, but create boundaries around your relationship with people. I mean, just because you forgive doesn't mean that you run and jump into their arms, or you call them up and have dinner with them, or you bring them back into your lives. No, it's a time to stop hurting yourself, to stop being condemned as a result of condemning. It's a time to do that and then set the appropriate boundaries, whatever those might be. But I think he has a wonderful way of dealing with this, and that is just do it all. Just do it all. Wipe the slate clean. And the interesting thing is we could develop all sorts of real neat mental machinations to do that. I mean, from seeing our life and our resentments and the unforgiven as being names on a whiteboard, and just erasing them, just erasing them. We do it with burning bowl traditions and a lot of other ways that we try and do this. But I'm suggesting today, and the reason for my talk today, is that we take a look at not blaming anything or anybody, not even us, any longer. If we start there, then you know what? All those forgiveness techniques, you can put them up on the shelf because you're never going to need them. Because you're living in the now and you're expressing as that singular source of only love. So I love you guys. And I appreciate what you did with Ho'oponopono today, which is a great forgiveness short prayer. And know that you are loved and cared for always. And so it is. Amen.